Sheriff Jack Reynolds had just settled into his recliner, a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and the TV remote in the other, when a thunderous pounding rattled his front door. The kind of knocking that made it sound like someone was trying to break in. He wasn't expecting visitors, especially not the kind who didn't seem to understand how a doorbell worked. With a long sigh, he set his coffee down, muttering to himself as he pushed off the chair and made his way to the door. The sight that greeted him nearly made him laugh out loud. 3 men stood on his porch, their chests puffed out like they were about to raid a drug den. They wore stiff, ill-fitting uniforms that looked like they came off a discount costume rack, and each had a plastic badge pinned to their chest. The leader, a middle-aged man with a thick mustache and mirrored sunglasses, took a bold step forward, brandishing an ID card that looked more like something from a child's play set than an official law enforcement credential. "Sir," the mustached man announced in a deep, overly authoritative voice, "we need you to step outside immediately." Jack crossed his arms, amusement flickering across his face. "And who might you be?" The mustached man squared his shoulders, clearly enjoying whatever fantasy he had built in his head. "We're with the HOA enforcement unit. You've violated multiple neighborhood ordinances, and we're here to bring you in." Jack stared at them, trying to decide if this was a prank or just 3 particularly bold idiots. His neighborhood's HOA had always been a pain in the ass, but this was a whole new level of ridiculous. He tilted his head slightly. "The HOA has an enforcement unit now?" "We do," the man confirmed, his 2 lackeys nodding behind him like trained parrots. "And we don't tolerate non-compliance." Jack exhaled sharply through his nose, biting back the urge to laugh. "You don't say." The mustached man reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, flipping it open with an exaggerated motion. "You have been cited for an unapproved mailbox design and unauthorized lawn furniture." Jack blinked, glancing at the standard black mailbox at the end of his driveway. "My mailbox?" The second man, a lanky guy with an unfortunate goatee, squinted at his clipboard. "Section 4, subsection B, line 12 of the HOA handbook states that all mailboxes must be of a neutral beige, taupe, or gray color to maintain uniformity." Jack turned his head toward his porch, where 2 perfectly normal Adirondack chairs sat untouched. "And my lawn furniture?" The mustached man hesitated, checking his notes before looking back up with forced confidence. "It's unapproved." Jack scratched his jaw. "So let me get this straight. You 3 are standing on my porch, trying to arrest me over a mailbox and some patio chairs? This isn't a joke," the mustached man snapped. "Non-compliance with HOA ordinances is a serious matter. You are required to come with us." Jack took a slow breath, folding his arms. "And where exactly are you planning to take me?" The man straightened his back. "To our holding facility." At that, Jack couldn't hold it in any longer. He let out a deep, genuine laugh. "You mean to tell me the HOA has a jail?" The mustached man's face turned red. "It's not a jail. It's a compliance center." Jack shook his head. "Well, gentlemen, I hate to break it to you, but I'm a little busy today. So, I'll have to decline your invitation." The leader's patience snapped. "That's it," he barked. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Jack didn't move. "Or what?" One of the lackeys reached for his belt, pulling out a cheap pair of handcuffs that looked like they'd break if someone sneezed too hard. "Do it now, sir, or we'll be forced to take action." Jack sighed, shaking his head. "All right, enough playing around." He turned slightly, reaching down, not for a weapon, but for the small radio clip to his belt. With a quick press of the button, he sent a silent distress signal to his deputies, all without breaking eye contact with the so-called officers. The mustached man grinned, clearly thinking he had won. "That's right," he said smugly. "You're learning your place." Jack held back another chuckle. Oh, he knew his place all right. And in about 2 minutes, these guys were about to learn theirs. The moment one of the lackeys stepped forward to slap the flimsy cuffs on him, Jack moved. With a single, fluid motion, he grabbed the man's wrist, twisted it behind his back, and spun him toward the nearest car. The man yelped as his face smacked against the hood, his clipboard clattering onto the pavement. The mustached man staggered back in shock. "Hey! What the hell do you think you're doing?" Jack didn't answer immediately, keeping his grip firm on the squirming lackey. His eyes flicked up to the leader, his voice calm and almost amused. "Performing a citizen's arrest." The second lackey hesitated before reaching for something on his belt, probably another fake citation or, God forbid, a plastic badge, but the sound of approaching sirens stopped him cold. Within seconds, 2 real police vehicles skidded to a stop, red and blue lights flashing. The so-called officers stood frozen, their self-assured posturing gone, replaced with the unmistakable look of men who knew they had just made the worst mistake of their lives. Deputy Ryan Carter stepped out first, one hand resting on his duty belt as he took in the scene, Jack pinning down one of the fake enforcers, the other 2 standing stiffly in their laughable uniforms. Carter arched an eyebrow. "Boss, you want to tell me why you're wrestling a guy wearing what looks like a Halloween police costume?" Jack let the squirming man go, stepping back and brushing off his hands. These 3 gentlemen were in the middle of conducting an unlawful arrest. Figured I'd save them the trouble of doing it the hard way. Carter let out a low whistle, then turned to the trio. "All right, let's see some IDs." The mustached man straightened his shoulders, clearly desperate to regain control of the situation. "This is a misunderstanding. We are authorized HOA enforcement officers, carrying out our duties." Carter blinked at him before reaching out and plucking the shiny badge off his chest. He turned it over in his hands, reading the engraved letters out loud. "Community Compliance Officer." His lips twitched as he looked back up at Jack. "This is a joke, right?" Jack smirked. "I wish." The mustached man puffed out his chest. "We have full legal authority to issue citations and enforce community standards." Carter remained unimpressed. "Yeah? And which department issued these fancy badges?" The man faltered, glancing nervously at his lackeys. "The Homeowners Association Security Division." Carter snorted. "That's not a thing." One of the lackeys, still rubbing his wrist from Jack's takedown, jumped in. "It is. We were given jurisdiction over all properties in this neighborhood." Carter tilted his head, feigning curiosity. "Jurisdiction, huh? Boss, did you sign off on that?" Jack smiled. "Nope." Carter let out a low chuckle before fixing them with a flat stare. "Then I guess you're just some guys playing dress-up." The mustached man's face darkened. "You don't understand. We were only enforcing compliance. We have every right to detain rule breakers." Jack stepped closer, his voice turning cold. "Detain? You tried to put cuffs on me over a mailbox." The mustached man hesitated, clearly realizing how ridiculous that sounded. "Well, technically." "There's no technically about it," Jack cut him off. "You impersonated law enforcement, trespassed on private property, and attempted to make an unlawful arrest." Carter folded his arms. "So let's start with some real names and real IDs." The 3 men hesitated but, under the weight of Carter's glare, reluctantly handed over their wallets. Carter flipped through them before showing Jack. "You're gonna love this. None of them are registered security guards. They don't even have basic certifications." Jack sighed. "You telling me they're not even rent-a-cops?" Carter shook his head. "Nope. Just some guys in cheap uniforms playing sheriff." The mustached man shifted uncomfortably. "Look, we were just following orders." Jack narrowed his eyes. "Whose orders?" The man hesitated again before muttering, "The HOA board." Jack crossed his arms. "Got any paperwork to prove that?" One of the lackeys, desperate to prove their legitimacy, dug into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled document, handing it over. Carter unfolded it and let out a short, incredulous laugh. "This isn't a contract. It's a volunteer neighborhood watch form." Jack skimmed it, shaking his head. "So let me get this straight, you three thought this gave you the authority to run around pretending to be cops?" The mustached man's lips pressed into a thin line. "It wasn't extortion. It was community enforcement." Jack gave him a hard stare. "How much were you charging people for these violations?" The three exchanged nervous glances but didn't speak. Jack exhaled through his nose, then turned to Carter. "Let's check their vehicle." Carter nodded and strode over to the HOA-branded SUV parked by the curb. He yanked open the door and began rifling through the contents. A moment later, he let out a low whistle. Well. We've got ticket books, fine notices, and, would you look at that, a cash box." Jack turned back to the mustached man. "You running an HOA, or a roadside scam?" The man swallowed hard. "We were just collecting fees." Jack shook his head. "No. What you were doing was fraud." One of the lackeys blurted out, "We were told to do it. The board promised us a cut." Jack exchanged a glance with Carter. Now they were getting somewhere. Carter pulled a small ledger from the SUV and started flipping through it. His expression darkened. "They've been hitting the whole neighborhood. Fake fines, intimidation tactics, even threats of foreclosure." Jack let out a slow sigh. "And people actually paid them?" Carter nodded. "Looks like it." Jack turned back to the three men, his voice sharp. "Here's what's going to happen. You're all being detained while we investigate. If you're lucky, you'll just be looking at fraud charges. If we find out you threatened or coerced anyone into paying, it's going to get a whole lot worse." The mustached man tried to protest. "You can't arrest us for enforcing community rules." Jack gave him a dry look. "Watch me." Carter stepped forward, pulling out a set of real handcuffs. "All right, boys. Turn around." The mustached man opened his mouth to argue, but when Carter raised an eyebrow, he slowly complied. The two lackeys followed, both looking thoroughly defeated as Carter cuffed them and started reading them their rights. Jack turned toward the small crowd of neighbors that had gathered to watch. Some were whispering to each other, others shaking their heads. An older woman near the front called out, "Sheriff, does this mean we can ignore those fines they've been giving us?" Jack gave her a reassuring nod. "If they ever made you pay, keep your receipts. The county prosecutor's going to want to see them." A murmur spread through the crowd, and more people stepped forward, each with their own horror story. Jack looked back at Carter. "We need to have a chat with the HOA board." Carter grinned. "Oh, I can't wait for that." Jack Reynolds knew that if there was one thing worse than petty HOA power tripping, it was corruption dressed up as community standards. And after what he had just uncovered, he wasn't about to let the people responsible for this mess off easy. As Carter loaded the fake enforcers into the back of the patrol cars, Jack turned his gaze toward the pristine white building that housed the HOA office at the center of the neighborhood. It looked more like a small corporate office than a community organization, with its freshly painted facade and manicured hedges. Given what he had just learned, Jack wondered how much of that landscaping had been paid for with extorted money. The moment he and Carter stepped through the glass doors, the room fell silent. Behind a long reception desk, a nervous-looking woman, probably an HOA admin, froze mid-keystroke, her eyes flicking between the two men. Beyond her, in a small conference room, a group of well-dressed board members sat in leather chairs, pretending to be engaged in some kind of serious discussion. The second they saw Jack, the entire mood shifted. A few exchanged wary glances, while others straightened their posture, clearly ready to defend themselves. But Martin Holloway, the HOA president, was the first to move. He stood, smoothing out his cheap suit jacket, and walked toward Jack with a forced smile. "Sheriff," Holloway greeted, his voice slick with false charm. "I assume you're here because of some misunderstanding." Jack folded his arms, unimpressed. "Not a misunderstanding, Martin. Your so-called compliance officers just got arrested for impersonating law enforcement, extorting residents, and attempting to detain me over a mailbox." Holloway's expression twitched, but he recovered quickly, offering a chuckle as if the whole situation was amusing. "Now, Jack, let's not get dramatic. We simply hired some enforcement personnel to ensure neighborhood guidelines were followed." Carter let out a short laugh. "Yeah? Because those personnel have been collecting thousands in fines, threatening foreclosures, and pocketing the cash. And funny thing, every dime seems to have disappeared into private accounts." A muscle in Holloway's jaw twitched. Behind him, Ellie Whitmore, the silver-haired board member who practically radiated self-importance, lifted her chin. "This is a private community, Sheriff," she said coolly. "People buy into this neighborhood expecting a certain level of decorum." Jack met her gaze with an icy stare. "And does decorum include bullying the elderly out of their homes? Because I just spoke to a widow who was forced into foreclosure over a fake violation. Not to mention the disabled veteran you made rip out his mobility ramp." Ellie's lips pressed into a thin line, but before she could respond, Carter stepped forward and slapped a stack of documents onto the conference table. The board members flinched at the sound. "We found these in your enforcer's car," he said. "Fake citations, a cash ledger showing fines collected, and, my personal favorite, a list of homeowners targeted for foreclosure." Holloway's smile faltered. "Now, hold on." Jack cut him off. "No, you hold on, we also found something else." He turned to Carter, who pulled out a USB drive in a clear evidence bag. "You want to guess what's on here, Martin?" For the first time, real fear flickered across Holloway's face. The rest of the board members looked equally uneasy. Ellie spoke up again, her voice sharp. "Sheriff, this is completely unnecessary. We were simply scamming your own residents," Jack interrupted. "This drive contains emails between board members discussing how much money you were raking in off these fake fines. It even includes a lovely little memo about how much you could squeeze out of a non-compliant homeowners before they fought back." Silence. Holloway licked his lips, clearly thinking through his options. Then, in a desperate attempt to spin the situation, he let out a nervous chuckle. "Look, maybe some lines were blurred, but this was all in the interest of community upkeep. We had to take action because..." Jack slammed his hand down on the table, making the board members jump. "Cut the crap, Martin. You weren't enforcing rules, you were running an extortion ring." Carter flipped through the financial records they had pulled from the enforcer's vehicle. "And according to these, you've personally pocketed tens of thousands of dollars. Wanna explain that?" Holloway opened his mouth, but before he could get a word out, the door to the conference room burst open. A woman, her face red with anger, stormed inside. The admin from the front desk tried to stop her, but she pushed past. "I knew something was going on," she snapped. "I just got off the phone with my lawyer. This HOA stole my house over a $2,000 fine." The room went still. Jack turned back to Holloway. "I think we're done here. Carter, place them under arrest." Holloway's hands shot up. "Wait. Sheriff, please. This was just a mistake. We can work something out." Jack gave him a hard stare. "You want to work something out? Start by refunding every single dollar you stole." Holloway stammered, his eyes darting between Jack and the rest of the board members. Ellie, for once, was speechless. Carter pulled out a set of handcuffs, and Holloway instinctively took a step back. The reality of the situation finally sank in. As the board members were led out one by one, the crowd of residents outside erupted in cheers. More people had gathered, some recording the arrests on their phones, others clapping and shouting in relief. Jack turned to Carter as they walked back to their squad cars. "You think this'll stop here?" Carter asked. "People like this don't go down easy." Jack exhaled, watching Holloway being stuffed into the back of a squad car. "No, but they picked the wrong town to mess with." He glanced back at the small crowd. Some of them were crying, others hugging. A few were still shaking their heads in disbelief. The weight of years of harassment, intimidation, and outright theft was finally lifting. And Jack wasn't done yet. Because if what he suspected was true, this whole mess was just the tip of the iceberg. Jack Reynolds knew better than to assume the fight was over just because the board had been backed into a corner. People like Martin Holloway and Ellie Whitmore weren't the type to roll over and accept their fate. They were schemers, manipulators, rats who'd gnaw through anything to save themselves. And Jack had seen it too many times before. Crooks like them always had a backup plan. That suspicion was confirmed just minutes after they left the HOA office. As Carter secured the board members in their squad cars, Jack's radio crackled to life. It was Deputy Lawson, stationed near the neighborhood's main entrance. "Sheriff, you're gonna wanna hear this," Lawson said, voice tense. "Holloway's trying to run." Jack's grip on the radio tightened. "Say again?" "He just sped past me in his Lexus. Got a suitcase with him. Headed west toward the freeway." Jack didn't hesitate. "Stay on him. I'm en route." Carter, who had overheard, let out a short, incredulous laugh. "That son of a, he really thought he could get away. Guess he finally realized the walls were closing in." Jack threw open his car door, already firing up the engine. "Let's remind him there's no escape from this." The tires screeched as Jack pulled onto the road, Carter right behind him. The neighborhood blurred past, Christmas lights twinkling on houses that had been suffocated under Holloway's corrupt rule for years. But tonight, those people weren't the ones running. Holloway was. Jack spotted the silver Lexus weaving through traffic just ahead, its driver desperate but reckless. The luxury sedan cut across two lanes, nearly clipping a minivan as it veered onto the freeway ramp. Jack gritted his teeth and accelerated, weaving between cars as he closed the distance. "Lawson, what's he carrying?" Jack asked over the radio. "Looks like a duffel bag stuffed with cash," Lawson responded. "I'd bet my pension it's HOA money." Jack wasn't surprised. Holloway had been bleeding this neighborhood dry for years, and now that the jig was up, he was trying to vanish before he could face justice. Not today. He punched the gas, pulling up alongside the Lexus just as they merged onto the freeway. Carter's squad car was right behind them, sirens blaring. Holloway jerked the wheel, trying to shake them, but Jack had anticipated the move. He nudged his bumper closer, forcing Holloway toward the shoulder. "Give it up, Martin," Jack muttered under his breath. "You're done." Holloway must have realized it, too, because suddenly his tires locked up as he slammed the brakes. Jack swerved to avoid a collision, but Carter was already on him. Before Holloway could make another move, Carter cut in front of the Lexus at an angle, forcing him to stop completely. Jack came to a halt just behind him, doors flying open before his boots even hit the pavement. Holloway lunged for the passenger seat, scrambling for the duffel bag. Probably hoping to make a run for it into the nearby brush. Not a chance. Jack reached the driver's side and yanked the door open. "Don't even think about it." Holloway turned, sweat beading on his forehead. "This is all a misunderstanding, Sheriff," he stammered. I was just..." Jack grabbed him by the collar and hauled him out of the car, slamming him against the hood. You were just fleeing a crime scene with a bag of stolen money. Carter opened the duffel, letting out a low whistle. Damn. Looks like close to $100,000 in cash. Holloway squirmed, but Jack pressed him harder against the car. You stole from homeowners, threatened people into foreclosure, and when the heat came down, you tried to skip town with their money. You really thought we weren't gonna catch you? Holloway let out a nervous chuckle, his mind still spinning for a way out. Listen, maybe we can work something out. Jack's grip on him tightened. The only thing you're working out is your prison sentence. As Carter cuffed Holloway, Jack turned his attention back to the neighborhood. Because while Holloway had been stupid enough to run, Ellie Whitmore and the rest of the board were still inside that office, and something told him they weren't just sitting quietly, waiting to be arrested. Jack grabbed his radio. Carter, finish up here. I want every single cent in that bag accounted for. Where are you going? Carter asked. Jack's eyes narrowed. Back to the HOA office. I've got a feeling they're destroying evidence. He didn't wait for a response. The moment he pulled up to the office, his suspicions were confirmed. Through the glass doors, he saw shredded papers littering the floor, and the faint glow of a fireplace flickering inside the conference room. Jack's blood ran hot. Those bastards were burning everything. He kicked open the door, the sharp crack of wood on metal making the admin at the front desk yelp in surprise. The hallway smelled like burnt paper. He stormed into the conference room, where Ellie Whitmore and 2 other board members stood feeding documents into the fire. Ellie turned, the usual smugness wiped from her face. Sheriff, this is a private. Jack didn't give her a chance to finish. Step away from the fireplace, One of the men made a half-hearted attempt to grab a stack of files off the table, but Jack was faster. He snatched them from his hands and flipped through them, financial records, homeowner complaints, fraudulent fines, everything they needed to prove the full extent of the HOA's corruption. Ellie took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. Now, Sheriff, this is all just a misunderstanding. Jack slammed the stack of papers onto the table. Shut up. She flinched. You already lost, Jack continued, his voice low and dangerous. We have your fake cops in custody. We have your leader in cuffs with a duffel full of stolen cash, and now, we have proof that you were actively trying to cover your tracks. Ellie's mask finally cracked. This is outrageous. You have no right to. Jack pulled out a second evidence bag, the USB drive Carter had confiscated earlier. He dangled it between his fingers. You recognize this? He asked. Ellie went pale. Oh yeah, Jack continued. This little drive has every shady email, every financial statement, every name on your hit list of homeowners you plan to evict next. Ellie's mouth opened, then closed. She was trapped, and she knew it. Jack turned to the deputies behind him. Arrest them all. Ellie let out a strangled noise as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Jack exhaled, rolling his shoulders. It was over. Holloway had tried to run, Ellie had tried to cover their tracks, but in the end, they had both failed. And now, Jack was going to make sure this entire corrupt operation burned, just not in the way they'd hoped. By the time the last of the HOA board members were hauled into squad cars, the neighborhood was alive with a new kind of energy, not fear, not frustration, but relief. For years, these people had been bullied, extorted, and forced to live under the rule of a corrupt organization that cared more about lining their own pockets than maintaining a community. But tonight, that reign had come to an explosive, humiliating end. Jack Reynolds leaned against his truck, arms crossed, watching as a crowd of residents gathered, their murmurs growing into laughter, cheers, and applause. Someone cracked open a beer. A group of kids rode their bikes down the street, free from the ridiculous, no bikes on sidewalks rule that the HOA had once tried to enforce. A man pulled a tacky pink flamingo out of his garage and triumphantly planted it in his front yard, earning raucous cheers from his neighbors. The neighborhood wasn't just celebrating the arrests, they were taking their lives back. Deputy Carter wandered over, holding a thick folder. Just got word from the county prosecutor. They're moving forward with felony fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering charges. And you're gonna love this, they're dissolving the HOA completely. Jack let out a slow breath. That was the best news of the night. No more board, no more fake fines, no more HOA. Just a community that could finally breathe again. A few residents stepped forward, still stunned. "Sheriff, does this mean we're getting our money back?" an older woman asked, clutching a handful of old violation notices. Jack nodded. "Every single cent. If they made you pay, keep your receipts. The county's gonna make sure you get it all back." The news spread fast. More people stepped up, sharing their own horror stories. One man had been fined $500 for having his Christmas lights up too long. Another had paid $300 for parking his own truck in his own driveway. A woman in tears said she had nearly lost her house over a made-up violation. Jack shook his head, listening to the stories. They're gonna have a hell of a lot more to answer for. An older man in a golf cap approached, a smirk on his face. "Sheriff, ever think about running for mayor?" Jack let out a short laugh. "Not a chance." The man winked. "Well, if you ever do, you've got my vote." Jack watched as the neighborhood turned into what felt like a block party. It wasn't just about celebrating the arrests, it was about freedom. People could finally live without fear of being fined, threatened, or bullied into submission. Carter nudged him. "Not bad for a night's work." Jack took a sip of his beer, scanning the crowd. Nah. This was about more than just a night's work. This was about giving people their homes back. He took a long breath, feeling the weight of the night settle. The HOA had tried to control everything, from the color of mailboxes to the lives of the people living here. But in the end, their greed had been their downfall. The real question was, how many other neighborhoods were still suffering under people like Holloway and Whitmore? Jack had a feeling this wasn't the only place where an HOA had taken things too far. And that left just one question: how many more people out there were still fighting their own battles against corrupt, power-hungry HOAs? Have you ever felt powerless against HOA, or Karen, rules? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.